Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Kamwangi AA Wash Processed Kenya from Little Wolf Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Little Wolf, based out of Ipswich, Massachusetts. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on numerous occasions, with our most recent review coming over 2 years ago now. And I was at a local coffee shop when I saw this coffee, and it did catch my interest largely because it had been a while since we'd reviewed anything from an American coffee roaster that still roasts on the Probat. And given that we have had some positive experiences with them in the past, I felt like it was worth checking out this Kenyan coffee. So we will see how it turned out, as this right here is day 47. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a significantly toned down one at a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 90 degrees Celsius, about 194 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which does indicate a more medium grind. However, we also went a little bit more coarse on that grind as well. Now, roast profile for this coffee, I was pretty surprised to see how developed this one did turn out to be, as we've recently reviewed stuff from Heart, which I mentioned isn't necessarily the lightest coffee roaster out there these days, but in comparison to that coffee, this one was significantly more developed, and you could feel that throughout the entirety of this coffee, as this is one of the most developed coffees we've reviewed from any coffee roaster in the last couple of months. So it is on the verge of being a true medium by our standards, but I wouldn't necessarily go that far. It's probably on the slightly lighter side of a medium or a very developed side of a medium light by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 15, first impression through the V60, and that was the biggest takeaway I had, was that the coffee was significantly more robust than expected given the past experiences we have had with Little Wolf. But it did play somewhat well for this coffee, as it did help with plenty of the sweetness, as there was a slightly candied plum feel to it. Plenty of the expected brightness with a slight fruit chew, cherry fruit chew quality, leading to a decent first impression. And I've said in the past that if there's one origin I don't mind being a little bit more developed, it's actually Kenyan coffees, largely because they do produce that interesting kind of fruit chew aspect when they can be that way. That being said, I was still kind of hesitant to see if this one was going to fit that mold, given that it just felt even more robust than even I tend to like with the Kenyan coffees that we do review. So mixed first impression, but we'll go ahead and move on to day 18 as we opted for the Chemex. And there was a similar sentiment this time around as well, as it's significantly heavier and more robust than initially expected. Very Kenyan-like, as it's direct and straightforward, but I definitely felt like some adjustments were going to be required for this one going forward. Day 21 through the UFO brewer, and the coffee does continue to remain pretty consistent, as it's offering plenty of the robust Kenyan experiences with a little bit more intensity and sweetness this time around. Coffee otherwise has a bright and red fruit forward experience, but again, it just seems to be marred by the more developed qualities of this coffee. Day 24 through the V60 with some lower extraction adjustments, so 15:1 at 93 degrees Celsius, and the coffee was the best that had been to this point, as this is the first time I was experiencing the listed tea-like quality that they have on here. Now, they have a very specific sweet tea descriptor, and I was kind of surprised to see just how well that was presenting within this coffee. Now, it's still marred by a lot of the less clean characteristics that were presented within this one, but at the same time, I felt like there was a really nice definition to that specific characteristic, as sweet tea is a little bit of a unique fruit, or I should say a little bit of a unique descriptor, and I could definitely see how it translated based off the experience, as it was a unique experience within this coffee overall. Outside of that, it has helped to mitigate some of the roasty qualities, allowing for more of the red candied fruit qualities to shine, leading to a better impression overall. Day 27 to the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the coffee is still offering more of the roastiness and robust characteristics than expected, and it didn't help mitigate it through this brew method, as there's a little bit more of an herbal quality and a bit of the prominent bright red fruit characteristics too. So when it comes to Kenyan coffees, that's not a huge selling point to me. I can give or take the brightness. I fully expected that with pretty much any Kenyan coffee, that's going to be what stands out, is the brightness to it. But given that it has the contrasting characteristics of the smokiness and roastiness and the brightness together, and there's a little in between all those things, I really wasn't enjoying the experience on this day either. So on day 30, we opted to go even lower on the extraction, so lower temperatures all the way down to 90 degrees Celsius and a more coarse grind. And there were mixed results once again, as it just seems like the more heavy and robust qualities of this coffee just hindered it overall. A little bit more of the herbality as well, as there's an abundant red fruit characteristic in a sweeter sense, but at the same time, I don't think that was enough to help offset the less desirable qualities of this one for me. Day 33. Through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the coffee was the best that had been to this point, as it was offering better definition and clarity. It was the cleanest that had been to this point, helping tone down more of those roasty qualities, allowing for a better presentation of a sugary sweet tea characteristic. If there's one highlight that I do want to point to with this coffee, is that it presented in a unique sense the way the sweetness was. That sweet tea characteristic that they have listed on here could be the priming effect, but I definitely felt like it was unique enough to the point where I hadn't experienced something that specific in pretty much any other Kenyan coffee that we'd reviewed up to this point. So I think that helped set this coffee apart and give it something a little bit unique as a positive. Final notes, we have day 36 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the coffee has been consistent for the most part, as it does have plenty of the red characteristics to it. So rosehip, hibiscus, a lot of what you'd expect in that sense. Bright red berries, so plenty of those currant-like qualities to it, and a slight bit of a tomato savoriness, which I haven't mentioned too much, but I feel like it's largely been mitigated by the other less desirable qualities, so a little bit of that roastiness and the slightly uneven brightness. Outside of that, there's a more lemon-like citrus and a brown sugar and caramelized sweet quality, which is some positives that give this coffee a little bit of depth as well. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have one level 5. Let's go through that one real quick, and that is the finish level 5. That's not a good level 5 when it comes to the finish for this coffee, largely because it does have that lingering, long-lasting, more roasty developed quality to it. And outside of that, the brightness also just kind of seems to linger. And I already mentioned that those are two characteristics that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of to begin with, but it does allow for this coffee to have a very lingering, long-lasting finish, even if it's a little bit of an uneven finish for my own preferences. Handful of level 4s. We will start somewhere we don't usually start when it comes to level 4s, body level 4. Now, it was brewed with the Chemex the final day that we do have, so it's always extremely surprising when we have something that full-bodied brewed through the Chemex, but that seemed to be the case with this coffee, as this is a pretty heavy-bodied cup of coffee. At the end of the day, it's a Kenyan coffee, so you do expect it to have that more juicy, heavier body to it, but even I was kind of surprised that we scored it as high as we did, and I really wanted to notate that and mark that within this tasting wheel because there's a lot of body to this coffee. Let's go ahead and move on to the sweetness level 4. One of the better parts of this coffee, as mentioned, there's that caramelized brown sugar quality, which is something that's often associated with Probat coffees, and I did think that there was enough fruit sweetness to it, that kind of cherry fruit chew characteristic, that unique sweet tea quality. So there's a lot in the sweetness, and that's definitely the highlight of this coffee for me, and having it at a level 4 is going to be one of the better traits of this one. Acidity level 4, no surprises whatsoever. Even with it being as developed and roasty as it is, the brightness did seem to still shine through a fair bit, even if I didn't find it to be the most even brightness of this coffee. Same thing with the florality. The florality shone through even with those more roasty qualities of this coffee, as I was able to experience plenty of those classic red floral characteristics to it, enough to the point where we bumped that all the way up there to the level 4. Same thing with the berry fruit there at the level 4. So even, actually, I'm going to take a very quick look because I'm kind of curious. Sweet tea, tangerine, and juicy. So they don't even have any of the red fruit characteristics or Kenyan qualities to this one, but this one was very Kenyan-like. So I'm very happy with it being there at the level 4. There's a lot of that throughout the entirety of this coffee. Let's go ahead and move on to the level 3s. Yeah, that's it for the level 4s. Citrus fruit, level 3. They have that tangerine note. A bridge too far for me. I can't necessarily see that. I see a little bit more of a lemon-like characteristic to it. I don't think the citric qualities were particularly sweet to it. They were a little bit more tart, a little bit more sour. So level 3, where we opted to put that caramel level 3, definitely plenty of those caramelized qualities. So that's another positive. I enjoyed that aspect of this one. That's usually something that I do tend to enjoy when it comes to Probat roasted coffees. Smokiness level 3, we'll discuss that alongside of the two other things. We'll discuss that alongside the savoriness level 2. Not enough tomato to bump that higher than the level 2 mark, but the other thing we must discuss it side by side with is the cleanliness level 3. I feel like that could be a little generous. Usually when we put a coffee at a level 2, it's heavily hindered by more fermenty, funky, boozy qualities, and it's hard to bump any sort of washed coffee all the way down to a level 2. While there is a fair bit of roastiness that's hindering this coffee, I don't think that there was enough maybe savoriness, enough of other characteristics, so fermentiness, funkiness, to really hinder it that much. It's not the highest level 3, it's probably on the lower side of that, and the smokiness being as high as it is, I mean, level 3 is very high. We don't score too many coffees that high when it comes to smoky characteristics or roasted qualities to a coffee, so make of that what you will. When the smokiness is higher than the cleanliness, it's not necessarily going to be an ideal setting for us. So as I'm looking at this tasting wheel though, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I do have to say I was pretty surprised at the way that it has turned out. I don't know if that's been the case with Little Wolf recently. As mentioned, it's been 2 years since we've last reviewed one of their coffees, so I feel like I have their coffee every so often here and there, and it hasn't ever translated to being as developed as this experience was. It could be a one-off. Mistakes happen. Sometimes coffee turns out to be a little bit more roasted than somebody was expecting, but I really don't know what to make of this coffee. If this is the new profile that they have, or if this is kind of always the profile that they've had, then I'm really surprised to see just the way that it turned out. But if it was a one-off, if it was a mistake, then I can probably see that. I do think that this coffee would have benefited from being even just a little lighter, and that's coming from somebody that really doesn't have an issue with a slightly more developed Kenyan coffee. I just feel like it hindered the experience of this one a little bit more than even I was expecting going into it. So didn't reach some expectations that I have. I thought this would turn out to be a pretty nice Kenyan coffee, much more in line with my own preferences, but not necessarily the case with this one. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. As mentioned, the sweetness does have some nice steps to it. So it does have that brown sugar, caramelized, sweeter, sweet tea characteristic to it, and even plenty of those red fruit qualities. So there's a lot of depth to the brightness. And if you don't mind your coffees being a little bit more developed, then you're also benefiting from a heavier bodied cup of coffee, because level 4, very uncommon to experience that. So I think those are the two things that I need to highlight the most: sweetness and body, which can be some more traditional characteristics of Kenyan coffees as well. Outside of that, plenty of brightness, plenty of the red characteristics, so traditional Kenyan in that sense as well. Kind of the best direction I could point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything from Little Wolf recently, I'd definitely love to know your thoughts and impressions of it, or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Kamwangi AA Wash Processed Kenya from Little Wolf Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.